Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing some exciting news coming out of the San Jose Sharks camp today, and that is that they have signed college free agent forward Colin Graf to an entry-level deal that will begin immediately over the last few games of this current season, meaning he will join the Sharks and likely get some games with them as well over the last 8 games of the regular season for San Jose. Now, usually college free agent signings fall into 2 particular categories. The first of which is a player who did end up getting drafted, but then used their rights as an NCAA player to play in college all the way until the end of their senior year, where then during that summer, they get the right to become an unrestricted free agent at the NHL level, not having to sign with the team that originally drafted them. This happened with players like Jimmy Vesey, or perhaps most notably and somewhat recently Adam Fox, who was drafted by the Calgary Flames, but after playing his senior year in college, decided to become an unrestricted free agent so he could sign with the team that he's really always wanted to play with originally, the New York Rangers. And that is quite notable because Adam Fox has become one of the best defensemen in the NHL currently. The other category, though, where these free agent signings can fall into is a player who had gone undrafted. No NHL team during their draft year wanted to pick him up, and as such, they just ended up continuing their hockey career in college, but showed enough notable improvement during their college time for an NHL team to come knocking and sign them up to a deal. Usually, these types of players are newsworthy, but not that interesting, because it is likely that they end up getting signed as a 4th liner or a 3rd line type of player. As a player who usually goes undrafted means that they didn't necessarily have a ton of potential. It is quite possible for one NHL team to make a mistake, but for all 32 NHL teams to make a mistake over a full 7-round draft is pretty rare. But that's what makes Colin Graf's situation all that more interesting, because he falls into that second category. He is an undrafted player who has been playing in the NCAA for these last couple of years. But what really stands out as a pretty unique situation for him is the reasoning for why he wasn't drafted those few years ago. And that is because even though he was a pretty skilled player, showed off some strong offensive flair, he had 2 massive faults that, when put together, make a player particularly untouchable at the NHL level. The first of which is that his skating wasn't said to be all that great. You want to be a pretty good skater at the NHL because the game happens at an incredibly fast speed. But the second fault, when combined with the first one, it was really what made it bad, is that Colin Graf was an incredibly small player at the time as well. At standing at just 5'8" and 145 pounds, a player who can't really skate that well and is also that size is going to have extreme difficulties, unless they are insanely talented, to find success at the NHL level. And so all 32 teams indeed did pass on him, although it may have been 31 teams at the time, with Seattle out of the NHL currently. But over these last few years at the NCAA, his game has developed not just in terms of the improved skating, but just physically. He has also developed as a late bloomer in his life. He is no longer 5'8", 145 pounds, which would have been quite undersized for an NHL forward. Instead, he now stands at 6'1", 195 pounds, which is actually likely slightly above average in terms of size for a forward at the NHL level, which suddenly makes his stock rise immensely, especially with the last couple of seasons that he has put up in the NCAA. Last year, he helped lead Quinnipiac to an NCAA title as a top 10 Hobey Baker nominee, and this year, while Quinnipiac did bow out in the quarterfinals to Will Smith's Boston College, he was again a Hobey Baker top 10 nominee. Not getting to that finalist level, but still an incredibly illustrious sort of honor given to him over these last couple of years. And so suddenly, as a college free agent, there were dozens of teams interested in trying to bring him in over these last few days as he was eliminated from the NCAA playoff tournament. And the San Jose Sharks have managed to win those sweepstakes for one major reason, is that a lot of the teams around the league don't have that same unique opportunity of being able to offer significant ice time to a player of Colin Graff's caliber. You take a look at so many of the playoff teams that may have been interested in the Canucks, the Golden Knights, the Bruins, the Maple Leafs, the Lightning. You could go all the way down the list. Yeah, these teams may have loved to bring in a player of Colin Graff's caliber, but they couldn't really guarantee anything more than bottom six time, or perhaps even some bench riding situations for a player who is quite inexperienced in the NHL playoffs compared to the much more experienced teams that these groups already have. And so a lot of those teams, if you're Colin Graff looking for a chance to play, are already eliminated off the table. Of course, the Sharks would then still be competing with a lot of the other rebuilding teams. I imagine teams like Chicago and Anaheim and Columbus were all very much in this situation. So it was quite nice to see the San Jose Sharks actually win out, and it could perhaps something to do with the same reason for why we saw Henry Thrun sign with the San Jose Sharks last year. Thrun was with the Anaheim Ducks, a team that finds himself right near the bottom of the standings just like the San Jose Sharks do, but Thrun's big reasoning for why he decided to leave Anaheim is that the Ducks had a ton of defensive prospects at the time who were above Thrun in the depth charts, where he didn't really see an opportunity to be able to become like a top defenseman for that team. The San Jose Sharks, yes, there is Will Smith there leading the way as the Sharks' top forward prospect. Quentin Musty is also hanging around there, and perhaps the Sharks this year will be drafting someone to join. Hopefully, Macklin Celebrini, fingers crossed on that situation. But there aren't necessarily a ton of huge names that would be blocking out Colin Graff's opportunity to really get some top six type of minutes with the San Jose Sharks. And so this was a great signing spot for him, as long as I imagine it came with some guarantees that you are going to be getting some playing time, which is why I do indeed expect down the stretch here Graff to get into a lot of games. And I mean, taking a look at the Sharks' current roster that they're icing, there is plenty of room here in this top six. Maybe you don't want to disrupt the first line of Granlund, Zetterlund, and Kostin, but when considering the second line features players like Luke Cunnin and Justin Bailey, I don't think it would be that much of an issue to get Colin Graff some early reps just on the second line, playing with a player like William Eklund at the NHL level right away and immediately. So this is a very interesting signing, a pretty big newsworthy move from Mike Grier, and definitely helps bolster the continuing to get better San Jose Sharks prospect pool that will only get even better this offseason at the draft. Class dismissed.